The value of a flame is in its light, not in being whole. That simple phrase changed the fate of an empire, but the one who spoke it wasn't wearing an Italian suit or sipping French wine. She was just a girl dusting shelves while the powerful played their games of humiliation. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel for thrilling stories every day, stories about ordinary people who achieved the impossible. The D'Almeida estate rested on the hills, overlooking the Napa Valley, like a majestic ship anchored in a sea of vineyards. Its enormous windows reflected the sunset, turning glass into liquid gold. Inside, however, the atmosphere was cold, not from the temperature, but from the calculated silence that preceded cruelty. Augusto D'Almeida, at 63, had built an empire in the wine export business. But his greatest fortune wasn't in the underground cellars brimming with award-winning vintages. It lay in the sadistic pleasure he derived from humiliating brilliant minds. Every Thursday night, he'd gather his 5 highest-paid advisors in Portugal, economists, lawyers, philosophers from foreign universities, in his dining room, and subject them to what he called the banquet of minds. It was simple. Augusto would pose philosophical riddles or logical paradoxes, and each guest would try to answer. Whoever failed received public scorn. Whoever succeeded, well, no one ever truly succeeded. Augusto always found a loophole, a flaw, a reason to dismiss the answer. The game wasn't about wisdom, it was about power. That October night, the table was set. Crystal gleamed under the light of 3 bronze chandeliers. The aroma of roasted lamb mingled with imported cigars. The advisors adjusted their ties and rehearsed diplomatic smiles. They knew what was coming. In the back of the hall, almost invisible behind heavy drapes and mahogany furniture, stood Benedita. 52 years old, hands calloused, in an immaculate navy blue uniform. She served water, cleared glasses, straightened napkins. She'd been doing it for 15 years. She knew every crack in that house, every wine stain on the Persian rug, every sigh of contempt Augusto let out when he belittled someone. And beside her, like an even more discreet shadow, was Lucia. 15 years old, hair pulled back in simple braids, eyes sharp. The girl shouldn't have been there, but her mother worked late, and leaving her alone at home was a bigger risk. So Lucia accompanied her. She helped clean, she observed, and, most importantly, she read. While Benedita organized the kitchen, Lucia wiped down the shelves in the library. There, among leather-bound volumes and rare first editions, she stole minutes. She opened Plato, Seneca, Spinoza. She read excerpts on formal logic, medieval poetry, treatises on ethics. She copied phrases into a tattered blue notebook she kept hidden in her apron pocket. No one noticed. To the inhabitants of that house, Lucia didn't exist. But she existed, and she absorbed every word, like a root absorbs rain. That night, as the banquet began, Lucia was dusting a shelf near the dining room. She heard everything, the forced laughter of the advisors, the awkward silence after each riddle, and Augusto's deep voice, always victorious, always cruel. "Gentlemen," he said, raising a glass of red wine as if it were a scepter, "tonight I have something special, a riddle that demands not just logic, but philosophical sensitivity. Are you ready?" The 5 men at the table exchanged glances. One, the gray-haired economist, nervously cleaned his glasses. Another, the younger lawyer, took a long sip of water. "Of course, Augusto," replied the white-bearded philosopher, forcing confidence into his voice. "We are always ready." Augusto smiled. It was the smile of someone who already knew the outcome. "Excellent. Then listen closely. If a candle splits into 2 and each half illuminates as much as the original, what then is the true value of the flame?" The silence that followed was dense, almost solid. The economist frowned. The lawyer drummed his fingers on the table. The philosopher closed his eyes, as if searching for the answer in some corner of his memory. Lucia, standing by the bookshelf, felt something stir within her. She knew that question, not exactly that one, but something similar. She'd read about it in a fragment of Heraclitus, jotted down months ago. But she said nothing. She just watched, waited, wiped the dust off a book, and remained invisible. The economist was the first to venture a guess. "I believe the value of the flame lies in the total energy produced," he said, adjusting his glasses. "If we split the candle in two and each half generates the same light, then the true value is in the sum of the two. It's a matter of energy efficiency." Augusto didn't answer immediately. He took a sip of wine, savoring the silence as if it were part of the drink. Then, slowly, he placed the glass on the table and looked at the economist with something between pity and contempt. "Energy efficiency," he repeated, ironically. "You've reduced philosophy to physics, my dear. The question wasn't about watts or joules, it was about value, and value isn't measured with thermometers." The economist lowered his eyes. The lawyer cleared his throat, preparing to try. "Perhaps the value lies in utility," he suggested. "If each half illuminates as much as the original, then the value is doubled. Two light sources are more useful than one. It's a practical matter." Augusto let out a short laugh, almost a bark. "Utility, how pedestrian. You've turned my riddle into an advertisement for electric bulbs. You understood nothing." The white-bearded philosopher took a deep breath. It was his turn. He knew that of all of them, Augusto expected the most from him, and that expectation was also a trap. "The value of the flame," he said, his voice careful, "lies in the essence of fire. The flame is not the candle, it is the process of combustion. Splitting the candle does not divide the essence of the flame. Therefore, the value remains the same, because the essence is indivisible." For a moment, Augusto seemed to consider. He tapped his fingers on the table. Then he shook his head. "Indivisible essence. Beautiful, but empty. You're speaking of Platonic abstractions that don't answer the question. If the essence is indivisible, then why does the light double? Your answer is poetically elegant and philosophically useless." The philosopher clenched his fist on the table but didn't reply. He knew it would be futile. Benedita, in the background, collected a tray of empty glasses. Her movements were mechanical, honed by years of invisibility. But her eyes searched for her daughter. Lucia remained by the bookshelf, motionless, the dusting cloth forgotten in her hand. The girl heard everything, and she felt something growing inside her. It wasn't anger nor indignation. It was clarity. The answer was there, as obvious as the dust on the books. As simple as the light filtering through the window, but she was just the janitor's daughter. He had no voice in that room. He had no place in that conversation. He had no right to exist beyond cleaning, serving, and disappearing. Augusto leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "None of you understood. As usual. The riddle remains unanswered. Perhaps next week one of you will prepare better. Or perhaps not. Mediocrity is resilient." The advisors lowered their heads. The dinner continued in awkward silence, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware against china. Augusto ate slowly, savoring not just the lamb, but the humiliation around the table. Lucia returned to cleaning. She ran the cloth over the spine of a book by Spinoza, then another by Heraclitus. And then, almost without thinking, she murmured to herself, so low she could barely believe she'd said it aloud. "The value of a flame is in its illumination, not in being whole." But she had said it. And the sound, however minimal, cut through the room like lightning on a clear day. The silence that followed was unlike the others. It wasn't the strained silence of the defeated, nor Augusto's calculated silence before delivering a verbal blow. It was the silence of the impossible, the sound of a world that stopped spinning for an instant. Augusto d'Almeida turned his head slowly, as if afraid a sudden movement might shatter the illusion. His eyes, accustomed to dominating the faces of powerful men, landed on a figure he had never truly seen, a young black girl in a worn apron holding a cleaning cloth. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice trembling, not with anger, but with something he couldn't name. Lucia felt the weight of every gaze. Benedita in the background froze with the tray in her hands, her heart pounding. The advisors turned in their chairs, incredulous. Who had spoken? The cleaner's daughter? Lucia swallowed hard. She could pretend she hadn't said anything. She could lower her head and return to safe anonymity. But something within her, something cultivated over years of silent reading, of copied phrases, of wisdom stolen from the margins of invisibility, would not allow it. "I said," she repeated firmer now, "that the value of a flame is in its illumination, not in being whole." Augusto rose from his chair. He walked toward her with slow, measured steps. He stopped a few feet away, studying her as if she were a rare artifact, unearthed at an archaeological dig. "Explain," he commanded. Lucia took a deep breath. The candle is just an object. The flame is the process, the transformation. When you divide the candle in two, you're not dividing the flame. You're multiplying the capacity to illuminate. The flame's value was never in the whole candle. It's in the act of giving light. And giving light doesn't diminish when it spreads. It increases. The advisors exchanged stunned glances. The white-bearded philosopher muttered something incomprehensible. The economist let out a nervous, almost hysterical laugh. Augusto remained silent. His lips moved, as if repeating the phrase mentally. Then something unprecedented happened. He smiled. Not a smirk, but a smile of recognition, of genuine surprise. "Where did you get that from?" he asked, and for the first time his voice held no venom. It held curiosity. "From your books," Lucia replied, gesturing to the bookshelf behind her. "Heraclitus, Seneca, Spinoza. I read while I clean." Augusto looked at the bookshelf, then at the girl, then at Benedita, who remained frozen in the background, torn between pride and fear. "You read philosophy while cleaning my house," he said, more to himself than to her. "And you understand it better than 5 men educated at the finest universities in Europe." "I understand what's written," Lucia corrected gently. "They try to understand what you want to hear. Those are different things." The young lawyer let out a muffled laugh. The philosopher closed his eyes, defeated not by the wrong answer, but by the right answer coming from the wrong place. Augusto returned to his chair. He sat down slowly. He took a sip of wine. And then, for the first time in 15 years of banquets of the mind, he declared, "The riddle has been solved." By a 15-year-old girl who cleans bookshelves. The advisors didn't know whether to applaud, to laugh, or to run. They opted for silence. Benedita set the tray down on a side table and walked over to her daughter. She took her hand, not to pull her away, but to stand beside her. Augusto watched the two of them, the cleaner and her daughter, the woman who had kept his house immaculate for 15 years and the girl he had never truly seen. And he felt, for the first time in decades, something he no longer knew how to feel: shame. In the days following that night, the Dalmeda mansion transformed. Not physically. The walls remained the same, the vineyard still undulated in the wind. The chandeliers shone with the same intensity, but something invisible had changed. As if the house had been turned inside out, and what was hidden was now breathing in the daylight. Augusto couldn't stop thinking about that phrase. The value of a flame is in its illumination, not in being whole. He repeated it mentally as he walked through the hallways, as he tasted wines alone, as he flipped through books he hadn't read in years. The phrase haunted him, not as an unsolvable riddle, but as a mirror reflecting something he preferred not to see. He had spent 15 years humiliating brilliant minds. And all that time, the answer he sought was there, cleaning his shelves, invisible to his eyes. What did that say about him? On the following Thursday, The banquet of the mind was cancelled. Augusto sent a laconic email to the advisors, temporarily suspending our meetings, personal matters, no further explanation. The 5 men, relieved and confused, speculated about the reason, but none dared to ask. Meanwhile, Augusto did something unprecedented. He asked Benedita and Lucia to join him in the library. Benedita entered with trepidation, her hands clasped. Lucia accompanied her, calm but attentive. Augusto was seated in a leather armchair, surrounded by stacks of books. There was no wine, no pomp, just a man and a question. "Sit, please," he said, gesturing to the chairs opposite him. They sat. Benedita stared at the floor. Lucia looked directly at him. "I spent 15 years, Augusto began, seeking intelligence in the wrong places. I paid fortunes to men who memorized ready-made answers, and I ignored the wisdom that was right under my own roof." Benedita looked up, surprised. "You," he pointed to Lucia, "have been reading my books for how long?" 3 years, the girl replied. "And no one ever told you to stop? No one ever saw me doing it?" Augusto laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. "Of course not. Because you're invisible, aren't you? The cleaner's daughter, just another piece of furniture in the house." Lucia didn't answer. She didn't need to. Augusto stood up and walked to the window. He observed the vineyards outside, the setting sun painting the leaves gold. "I want to fix this," he said without turning. "I can't get back the time I wasted, but I can do something now. I want to create a scholarship in your mother's name. And I want you, Lucia, to study at one of the best philosophy schools in Europe." Benedita covered her mouth with her hands. Tears welled up before she could stop them. Lucia, however, remained serene. "Why?" she asked. Augusto turned, confused. "What do you mean, why? Why do you want to do this? To clear your conscience? To have a good story to tell? Or because you truly believe I deserve it?" The question was sharp, but not aggressive. It was honest. And Augusto, accustomed to asking cruel questions, didn't know how to answer a sincere one. He returned to his armchair. He sat down slowly. "Maybe it's all of that," he admitted. "Maybe I'm trying to fix something I broke within myself. But I also believe, yes, that you deserve it, more than any of the men who have sat at my table." Lucia nodded. "Then I accept, but with one condition." Augusto raised his eyebrows. "A condition? That the scholarship be open to other children of workers in this house, and from other houses, and that you stop humiliating the people who work for you." Benedita squeezed her daughter's hand, scared and proud at the same time. Augusto was silent for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. "I accept." Lucia shook his hand. And in that handshake, something was sealed. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't immediate redemption. But it was a start. 2 months later, Lucia boarded a flight for London. She carried a simple suitcase, the torn blue notebook, and her mother's blessing. Benedita stayed at the mansion, but now she walked the halls with her head held high. Not because her position had changed, she was still the housekeeper, but because she had been seen, recognized, acknowledged. Augusto kept his promise. He established the Benedita Maid'S scholarship, intended for the children of domestic workers. The news spread through the elite circles of Lisbon, generating mixed reactions. Some applauded the initiative, others called it theatrical, performative. Augusto didn't care. For the first time in decades, he wasn't seeking approval. He was seeking reparation. The banquets of the mind never happened again. In their place, Augusto began hosting young scholarship recipients for open discussions without trapped riddles, without humiliation. He listened more than he spoke. He learned more than he taught. The advisors, dismissed from their ceremonial duties, reacted in their own ways. The white-bearded philosopher sent a long letter to Augusto, thanking him for freeing him from a charade that had always embarrassed him. The economist simply disappeared, likely relieved. The young lawyer became one of the scholarship's biggest supporters, donating his own resources. Lucia, in London, quickly distinguished herself. Professors commented on the depth of her reflections, the originality of her interpretations. She wrote essays on social invisibility, on the value of marginal knowledge, on the philosophy found in everyday gestures, and always in every text she mentioned her mother. Benedita taught me that cleaning isn't erasing, but revealing, that dust conceals but care illuminates. A year after her departure, Lucia returned to Lisbon for winter break. Augusto organized a dinner, not a banquet, but a simple celebration. Benedita, a few scholarship students, former advisors and neighbors were present. When Lucia entered the room, everyone stood up. Not out of protocol, but out of genuine respect. Augusto asked to speak. "A year ago," he began, "I asked a question, a riddle I used to humiliate people, and I received an answer that changed my life. Not because it was the right answer, but because it came from a place I had never looked." He raised a glass. "To Lucia and to Benedita, the women who taught me that the value of a flame is in illuminating, not in being whole." Everyone raised their glasses. Benedita cried. Lucia smiled serene. And that night, for the first time, the Dalmeida mansion wasn't a stage for humiliation. It was a home. Imperfect, still transforming, but finally honest. 5 years passed. Lucia completed her philosophy studies and returned to Portugal, not to work in traditional universities, but to create something new, an itinerant philosophy school for domestic workers, cooks, doormen, security guards, people whose minds were rich, but whose voices had historically been silenced. The school had no fixed building. It operated in community centers, public squares, borrowed rooms. Lucia taught Plato to cooks, Seneca to gardeners, Spinoza to cleaning ladies. And most importantly, she taught that philosophy wasn't the possession of elites, but the right of all who think, question, and seek meaning. Benedita, retired, became Lucia's assistant. She organized materials, prepared coffee, welcomed students, but she also participated in the classes, asking questions that left even guest lecturers in silence. Augusto, now 70, visited the classes regularly. He sat at the back like any student and listened. Sometimes he participated. Other times he simply observed, marveling at the transformation a single sentence had wrought. The Benedita Dalmeida Scholarship had already sent 30 young people to universities across Europe. Many returned and joined Lucia's project. Others created their own initiatives. The flame spread. One spring afternoon, after a class on the ethics of care, Augusto pulled Lucia aside for a private conversation. They walked through the mansion's gardens, which now hosted some of the school's activities. "You saved me," he said suddenly. Lucia looked at him, surprised. "Saved me?" "Yes. I was trapped in a fortress of arrogance. I thought intelligence was a weapon to humiliate. You showed me it's a light to share," Lucia smiled. "I did nothing more than say what was written in your own books. But I had never truly read them," Augusto replied. "I collected knowledge like I collected wine. To display, not to savor." They stopped before an old rosebush laden with white flowers. "Do you know what I learned from your mother?" Lucia asked. Augusto shook his head. "That invisible work is what sustains everything. That cleaning, cooking, caring. These are the oldest philosophies in the world. My mother never read Aristotle, but she lived the ethics of care every day, and that's worth more than 1,000 unanswered riddles." Augusto nodded, his eyes welling up. "Thank you," he said simply, and in that moment under the spring sun, surrounded by the scent of blooming lilacs and the distant echo of college laughter, Augusto Dalmeida understood something no book, no mentor, no riddle had ever taught him. That the true value of a flame isn't in shining solo atop a silver candelabra. It's in dividing itself, spreading out, illuminating even the most forgotten corners. It's in transforming the unseen into the seen, the silenced into speakers, shadows into light, and that this flame once lit never truly goes out, even when divided, especially when divided. And you, what did you think of this story? Did it make you reflect on the people who keep the world running quietly behind the scenes, about the invisible knowledge, the marginalized intellects, the voices we never thought to listen to? Leave a comment telling us what you felt. And subscribe to the channel to get inspiring stories every day. Stories that illuminate, that transform, that spread flames. Because the value of our narrative lies in illuminating, not in being whole. And each one of you is a part of that light.